Qereqeretabua.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, like many of my parliamentary colleagues, I came to this House with the sole purpose of making a change for the better in the lives of our fellow citizens. Like many of my parliamentary colleagues, I firmly believe in the principles of genuine equality of opportunity, genuine reconciliation, and genuine forethought for the future of our country. These principles, however, are principles not expressed by the Honourable Attorney General when he introduced to this august House the 2019-20 budget. Instead, Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Attorney General and Minister for Economy thought it fit to stroke the past in a diatribe that lasted for over half an hour, as if to cover up his own blunders or the blunders of his government. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to borrow and paraphrase the slogan of the taxpayer-funded Fiji Broadcasting Commission, or FBC TV, the difference is clear, because clearly, this budget time around, there is no difference. The Fiji First government is fresh out of ideas and has senga, nahi, sound and sensible solutions for the social, economic and political advancement of our nation. The only thing they are consistent on is inconsistencies. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, the 2019-2020 budget handed down on Friday, the 7th of June by the Honourable Minister of Economy confirms this government is losing ground on the necessary ideas that can bring forth real leadership and practical economic growth that Fiji solely needs to achieve national unity, nation building and true nationhood. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to address some fundamental issues related to the budget, and it is to do with basic courtesy and just good manners. If I were to Qereqere the Honourable Minister for Economy for $20 in order to buy washing powder like boom, you can expect that during my Qereqere I would be very polite and very humble, and that upon purchase of the washing powder, I owed to him to show proof of purchase. Otherwise, he would label me as a liar or a con artist. What I have seen thus far is deeply disappointing, Mr. Speaker. Many government institutions, statutory entities and private organizations that fall under the various ministries are so quick to put in their budget submissions and talk or project themselves up when it's budget time, but they do not reciprocate or honor the taxpayers or even the laws that mandate their accountability and table their annual reports. This is as clear a signal as any of unprofessional incompetence. And I fully intend to ensure this is corrected. And even those hiding in the head 50, getting grants, who are so quick to inhale public funds from many people earning as little as $2.68 an hour, must account for every cent in the highest court of the land, this House, the People's House. Mr. Speaker, the National Federation Party subscribes to principles that will correct economic imbalance so that economic growth benefits all instead of a government's legislative control of the economy. So what transpired in the period of the so-called unprecedented economic growth of 10 straight years, leading up to this Bainimarama boom budget, or boom, boom, boom budget, as stated by the Honourable Prime Minister himself? For all intents and purposes, Mr. Speaker, this budget is a noose around the neck of all ordinary Fijians and will ensure shackled hardship for our people under the skyrocketing cost of living. We were not the party in control of the Treasury making unilateral decisions on how to spend taxpayers' funds. They were. We were not the party that indulged in a campaign of fear-mongering, freebies and handouts. They were. Mr. Speaker, this budget is the product of two-man rule. A budget that is desperately now trying to claw in every source of legal revenue for government's frivolous expenditure while knowingly ignoring the fundamental issues facing all ordinary Fijians. The alarming hike in cost of living has resulted in some meat outlets selling lamb flaps, which were outlawed many years ago. Mr. Speaker, there are families living in desperate conditions, but we're told that all is well. Mothers forced to sleep on the floor of hospitals after they have just given birth, but we're told that all is okay. Families forced to eat fish bones for dinner, but we're all told everything is okay. Mr. Speaker, there is no growth if we don't all share in that growth. There can be no onward march together unless we all progress together. The miserable minimum wage of $2.68 an hour, the never-ending civil service reforms, the gutting of a once vibrant tourism industry by exorbitant taxes, a crumbling health and medical care system, the patchwork of huge craters on the road network that is further forcing motorists to frequent spare part shops and depleting their already meager incomes, a sugar industry that is failing right under the noses of this government, and the list goes on and on and on. This is a boom for whom, Mr. Speaker? Because there is but a small elite really benefiting from it. There is not a boom, it is only kaboom. It is a budget aimed at strangulating our ordinary Fijians. It is an attempt to salvage the pride of two men who, in adherence to the Fiji First Constitution, have imposed their will upon all of our people. But the time to be silent is over. Now we have come to this kaboom budget, Mr. Speaker, and how have we done so? In his maiden speech on the 14th of October 2014, the leader of the National Federation Party, the Honorable Professor Biman Prasad, said, and I quote, "We have two obligations at the core of our role as MPs. First, we have to make our democracy work, and second, we have to make our democracy work for our people." What do I mean by that? To make our democracy work, we need to ensure that our citizens and their organizations are able to freely comment, support, and when needed, criticize policies and programs when debated in this House. They need to know that our media will amplify their voices and ensure that their voices are directly heard by us. This way we will know how citizens feel about and experience government policies and programs. Our democracy will grow from this new openness. Second, we need to make our democracy work for our people. When necessary, we will criticize government's policies. When we shall do so, it will not be for the sake of doing so, but because we, in our considered view, are able to provide credible alternatives, unquote. Mr. Speaker, sir, the proposed budget brings to mind a few commonly used phrases, a champagne lifestyle on a beer budget being one of them. The NFP warned last year that when Fiji First was traipsing around the country, handing out freebies, that nothing was free, and that all of us would end up paying sooner rather than later. More than a decade of excessive spending is resulting in this fiscal consolidation, which is just economic speak for the reduction of expenditure. And now it's time to pay the piper. So I ask again, the boom is for whom? At the start of the first term of school this year, the Honorable Prime Minister said, and I quote, "And I've always believed that funding our children's education is the best single investment our government can make. That is why I am proud that this year is $1 billion year for our education system, as our last annual budget saw education become the first sector to ever receive an over $1 billion allocation," unquote. Boom. Not 6 months later, and there is a budget cut of $200 million to this single best investment that a government can make. Here are some stark realities that teachers now face. Number one, the possibility of less pay or suddenly turning 55. The budget estimates already suggest that trend in the personal emoluments allocations across all heads. 2, larger classes. This is an existing problem. Honorable Speaker, may I just ask that we have less of this and more of that? This is an existing problem that will only get worse. With budget cuts, come larger classes. And research has shown that students learn better in smaller classes. 3, less spent on materials. More and more of this is going to be either provided by the teachers or the students themselves. 4, less school-wide material and technology purchases. 5, delays for new textbooks. The free textbooks are not free. Yes, schools now print out textbooks that students use in classrooms, but very often they are either shared in the classroom and often cannot take them home to study. Students preferring their own home copies of textbooks will need to fork out internet and printing costs themselves, and now with the limitation of the free bus fare up to only 4:30 p.m., home copies of textbooks may probably be necessary for all students. 6, less professional development opportunities for teachers. Teaching, just like any profession, becomes stagnant without continual self-improvement. However, with budget cuts, these activities are typically some of the first to go. 7, less electives. 8, possibility of a forced move or school closures, like what happened at Lovella Bay Secondary. The honorable calling of teaching has been reduced to being one of the most stressful jobs in the country. If they dispute that, Mr. Speaker, I challenge them to issue a statement and give our teachers that peace of mind that they require. Blaming children for the cancellation of free milk scheme is juvenile, but by now symptomatic of a government that is out of options. Why are children being blamed when adults like the Honorable Minister for Economy tabled that policy with much fanfare in the 2015 budget that claimed to turn promises into deeds? Again, the estimates point out just how real this situation is, where previous allocations of 3.1 million from 2015 to 2018 have suddenly nosedived to $400,000 for those in maritime regions. Preventing children from using the student e-ticketing bus cards after 4:30 p.m. is another knee-jerk reaction we expect from a government that is out of options. Surely Vodafone, as a service provider for e-ticketing, should have been able to track the trends more holistically. Why can't this august House be privy to those reports and statistics so that we can be assured that such a major policy shift is warranted? E-ticketing is still limping from execution issues, and we don't even know how much money is involved from past taxpayers' injections and the benefit to government revenue. Vodafone really should be asked to table a report in this House. Blaming past governments and using legacy problems is the old and worn-out crutch some on the government side continue to use to cover up the Fiji First government's failings. But what will their legacy be, I ask Mr. Speaker? What is going to be their legacy? Loans, debts, even a 40-year repayment time at the end of 40 years. Mr. Speaker, sir, Mr. Speaker, through you, sir, less of this, sir, and more of this, please. Mr. Speaker, with a 40-year repayment time at the end of 40 years, the architects and signatories of the debts post-2005 will be long gone, but the debt will still be there for the children and young adults of today and their families to pay. If there are going to be pay cuts and job losses, my suggestion, Mr. Speaker, is that the very people who allow the champagne lifestyle to carry on whilst operating on beer money should be the first ones to experience pay cuts and job losses. Our economy is in the ICU because of the irresponsibility of this government. Why should the most vulnerable children, women and men, suffer because of the bad financial management of our money? Why should everyday families suffer while a few continue to benefit? Mr. Speaker, through you, let me ask the House, who was Prime Minister when the 100 Sands Casino blunder happened? Who was the Prime Minister when Waila City happened? Who was the Prime Minister when drugs entering Fiji are at an all-time high? Who was Prime Minister that endorsed a mobile app that actually defies the laws of physics? And who was the Prime Minister when the Malolo saga unfolded? For all the talk about environment, they slashed the environment's budget. How can we trust a government that says one thing and does another? The Malolo fiasco will not be allowed to be swept under the carpet, and we will get to the truth. How can we trust a government that believes that it knows everything? Pride comes before the fall, Mr. Speaker, sir. The Honourable Minister for Economy said one word during his budget address that made me sit up and take notice, and the word was humility. This government must practice what it preaches. Humility. Accept that it made mistakes that ordinary families of Fiji, not their families, are going to pay for years to come. And that is why, Mr. Speaker, I say an emphatic no to the 2019-2020 appropriation bill. Thank you.
Honourable members, I thank